"Mom, why did you teach me to hate the only man who truly loved me?" I asked, holding the DNA test result that proved my Uncle Miguel was my biological father. The revelation arrived on a Thursday morning like a hurricane, destroying everything I believed about my identity, my family history, and especially about who I really was. I was sitting at the white marble table in my kitchen, having my usual breakfast, whole wheat bread with homemade strawberry jam and black coffee without sugar, when the mailman rang the doorbell delivering a sealed envelope with the DNA test result I had requested 3 weeks before. My hand was shaking violently when I tore open the brown paper protecting the most important document of my adult life, and when I read the first lines of the scientific report, I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet like a devastating earthquake. Probability of paternity: 99.9% positive between Miguel Santos and Beatriz Santos, said the official paper in black letters that seemed to scream the truth my family had hidden for 35 years. Miguel, the man I had learned to despise since childhood, whom my mother always described as irresponsible and dangerous, whom I avoided at family gatherings and treated with calculated coldness, was actually my biological father. The man Roberto, my official father, always said was worthless, was the one who had really fathered me, and this discovery turned my stomach as if I had ingested pure poison. Tears began to run down my face without my being able to control them, while my mind worked frantically trying to process the devastating implications of this revelation that completely changed my perception of 3.5 decades of family life. Each memory of my childhood now took on a completely different and disturbing meaning. The constant fights between my mother Sandra and Miguel during family parties. The looks loaded with resentment she directed at him when she thought no one was watching. The way Roberto always changed the subject when someone commented on my physical resemblance to Miguel. How could everyone lie to me for so long? How was my own mother capable of constructing such an elaborate farce? I thought in anguish, remembering all the times Miguel tried to approach me during my adolescence and youth, always being coldly rejected because I had completely internalized the family narrative that he was a problematic and inappropriate man. Now I realize that each of his attempts to talk to me, each gift he offered on my birthdays, each melancholic look he directed my way during Sunday lunches were not gestures of an eccentric uncle, but of a desperate father trying to connect with a daughter who had been programmed to hate him. The weight of this understanding made me double over on the table, sobbing in a way I hadn't experienced since my paternal grandmother's death 10 years ago. The urgent need to confront someone about this monumental lie made me pick up the phone with trembling hands and call my mother, who answered with her sweet, familiar voice that now sounded completely false to my ears. "Hi, my daughter. How are you?" "I'm glad you called. I was missing you," she said with the usual affectionate tone that for decades had reassured me and made me feel loved, but which at that moment caused me nausea of pure disgust. I couldn't beat around the bush or prolong the agony of discovery, so I went straight to the point that was shattering my heart. "Mom, I need you to come to my house now. I have something very important to show you and I can't discuss it over the phone." I noticed a subtle hesitation in her voice when she answered, as if some maternal instinct was warning her that something terrible was about to happen. "Honey, is everything okay? Your voice sounds strange. Did something happen?" I forced a neutral tone that was far from what I was feeling as I replied, "Just come, Mom. Please drop everything you're doing and come here as quickly as possible." I hung up before she could ask more questions because I knew that if we continued talking, I would end up shouting all the accusations that were bubbling in my mind like volcanic lava ready to erupt. During the 40 minutes it took her to arrive, I paced around the house like a caged beast, mentally reviewing each family situation where I now perceived obvious signs of the truth that had been carefully hidden from me. When I heard the familiar sound of my mother's car parking in the garage, I felt an explosive mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal that made me tremble from head to toe like a leaf in the wind during a violent storm. Sandra came through the kitchen door wearing her favorite floral dress and carrying a shopping bag that indicated she had done some shopping on the way, probably trying to maintain the normality of her routine while heading toward what would possibly be the most difficult conversation of her life. Her usual maternal smile instantly disappeared when she saw my facial expression and the open envelope on the table, her brown eyes widening with a mixture of panic and resignation that confirmed my suspicions even before we began to talk. "Beatrice, honey, what is this?" she asked with a trembling voice, pointing to the papers scattered on the table as if they were venomous snakes ready to attack. I took the test result and held it in front of her face, my voice coming out colder and more controlled than I expected. "This, dear mother, is the scientific proof that you've lied to me my entire life about who my real father is." The impact of these words was immediate and devastating. She dropped the shopping bag on the floor with a dull thud, fruits rolling across the ceramic floor as her face turned completely pale as if all the blood had drained from her veins. "My God! How did you find out? Why did you take this test?" she whispered, indirectly confirming that she knew exactly what I was talking about. The confession that followed was even more shocking than I had imagined during those 40 minutes of anguished waiting, revealing not just a lie about my paternity, but an entire complex network of deceptions and manipulations that had shaped my personality and family relationships. Sandra collapsed into the chair in front of me, her hands covering her face in a futile attempt to hide the shame that was consuming her, and between broken sobs began to reveal the truth that she had kept as a deadly secret for more than 3 decades. I had been married to Roberto for 2 years when I got involved with Miguel during a crisis in our marriage, she began, her voice muffled by her own hands that still covered her face. Miguel was everything Roberto wasn't: passionate, intense, present, but also financially and emotionally unstable. She raised her face to look at me, tears flowing freely down her cheeks as she continued. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I wasn't sure who the father was, but Roberto had just received an important promotion at work and represented security for me and for you." Every word that came out of her mouth was like a stab in my heart, revealing that my existence had been the result of a carefully hidden betrayal and that all the decisions about my upbringing had been based on lies and convenience. "So you chose Roberto because he had money and stability and decided that I would never know the truth?" I asked, my voice loaded with an indignation that grew with each second. The justification my mother presented for decades of lies was even more revolting than the initial betrayal itself, showing a systematic psychological manipulation that had shaped my personality in a profound and harmful way. "Beatrice, you need to understand that Miguel at the time was problematic. He drank too much, constantly changed jobs, had debts," she said, trying to rationalize her choices as if they were based on genuine maternal concern. "I feared that if you knew the truth, you would want to have a relationship with him and end up getting hurt or disappointed." I interrupted her explanation with a bitter laugh that echoed through the kitchen. "So you decided to make me hate him preventively. You taught me to despise my own father to protect your lie." The shocked expression on her face told me she had never thought about her actions in such a direct and raw way. I continued my accusation, releasing decades of emotional confusion that now made sense. "Throughout my life, you made a point of highlighting all of Miguel's flaws, telling me stories about how irresponsible he was, warning me not to trust him. You systematically destroyed any possibility of me having a healthy relationship with my own father." Sandra tried to protest, but I wasn't finished. "And Roberto? Did he always know the truth, or did you deceive him too?" The pause before her answer gave me the confirmation I feared. Roberto had always known there was a possibility I wasn't his biological daughter, but he had agreed to keep the secret to preserve the family they had built together. The revelations continued unfolding like an emotional avalanche that completely buried the family I thought I knew, and each new piece of information made the betrayal more complex and painful. "Roberto discovered my affair with Miguel when you were 2 years old," Sandra confessed, avoiding my direct gaze as she spoke. "He gave me an ultimatum. Either I completely cut ties with Miguel and you would never know the truth, or he would file for divorce and fight for your custody." This revelation made me realize that Roberto, the man I had called father my entire life, had also actively participated in the conspiracy to hide my true origin. So you both decided together to deprive me of the right to know my biological father? I asked, feeling a rage that grew exponentially every second. You decided that I didn't have the right to make my own decisions about who I wanted to have a relationship with. Sandra finally looked me in the eyes, and what I saw was a mixture of regret and desperation that made me feel sorry for her for a few seconds before the anger returned with full force. At the time, it seemed like the best decision. Roberto offered stability, a structured home, quality education. Miguel wasn't in a position to offer any of that, she said, still trying to justify choices that had shaped my entire life. But that made me lose 35 years of relationship with my real father, Mom. 35 years in which he tried to get close to me and I rejected him because you taught me he was no good. The conversation continued for 2 more devastating hours, during which every aspect of my childhood and adolescence was re-examined through the lens of this disturbing new reality that changed the meaning of practically all my family memories. Sandra revealed details about how she and Roberto had worked together to build a consistent narrative about Miguel being a problematic and untrustworthy uncle, how they had coordinated stories to tell when I asked about our family, and how they had even invented fictional events to reinforce the negative image they wanted me to have of him. Remember that time when you were 8 and you asked why Miguel always seemed sad when he looked at you? Sandra asked, and I immediately remembered the situation. It was at my grandmother's birthday party, and I had noticed how Miguel observed me with a melancholic expression. Roberto and I told you it was because he envied our happy family, that he was having financial problems and resented our stability, she continued. In reality, he was sad because he desperately wanted to have a father-daughter relationship with you, but knew it was impossible because of the agreement we had made. This specific revelation emotionally destroyed me because I vividly remembered how I had moved away from Miguel at that party, going to play with my cousins instead of responding to his shy smile. How many opportunities to connect with my father did you destroy with your lies? I asked, my voice failing with emotion. How many precious moments were lost forever because you decided you knew what was best for me? When Sandra finally left the house 3 hours after arriving, I felt as if I had been run over by a truck loaded with devastating truths that completely changed my perception of my own identity. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour, staring fixedly at the DNA result that remained open before me like a judicial sentence condemning my entire family for decades of systematic deception. The house was silent, but my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, anger toward my mother and Roberto for orchestrating this elaborate lie, deep sadness for the years lost with Miguel, and a painful curiosity about who I could have really been if I had grown up knowing the truth about my origins. I picked up the phone several times to call Miguel, but always gave up at the last second because I didn't know how to start a conversation about such a complex and delicate subject. How do you call someone who is your biological father but whom you treated as an inconvenient stranger for decades? I asked myself out loud, my voice echoing through the empty house. How do you apologize for 35 years of rejection based on lies that you believed were truths? The weight of this responsibility, even knowing that I had been a victim of manipulation, made me feel guilty for every cold interaction I had with Miguel over the years. The days that followed were an intense emotional roller coaster that tested my ability to process complex traumas while trying to make rational decisions about how to deal with this devastating new reality. I couldn't concentrate on my work as an architect, making basic mistakes in projects that I would normally solve effortlessly, and my colleagues began to notice that something serious was happening in my personal life. I woke up every early morning with nightmares where I was a child again. But this time Miguel was present as a caring father, taking me to school, helping me with homework, comforting me when I cried, dreams that made me wake up crying for a childhood that had never existed. During the day, I found myself observing old family photos with a completely new perspective, noticing details that previously went unnoticed. The way Miguel always positioned himself slightly away from the group, as if he knew he didn't fully belong to that family dynamic. The furtive glances he directed at me when he thought no one was watching. The subtle sadness in his eyes even during happy moments of celebration. How could I have been so blind for so long? I constantly questioned myself, analyzing every gesture, every word, every interaction that now took on completely different meanings. My perception of my own personality was also being questioned. Characteristics that I had always attributed to Roberto's influence now seemed to clearly come from Miguel. From my tendency toward melancholy to my passion for classical music, which was something Roberto never showed interest in. The decision to seek psychological help was made on a Sunday morning, when I found myself crying uncontrollably in front of the bathroom mirror because I had noticed that my green eyes were identical to Miguel's, an obvious resemblance that everyone always commented on but that I had learned to interpret as a mere distant genetic coincidence. I called the psychology clinic near my apartment and managed to schedule an emergency session with Dr. Fernanda, a psychologist specialized in family traumas who had been recommended by a friend who had gone through a similar situation of paternity discovery. Dr. Fernanda's office was a welcoming environment with walls in soft tones and plants that created an atmosphere of tranquility that completely contrasted with the emotional chaos I was experiencing. When I told her the whole story, from the DNA discovery to my mother's devastating revelations, I observed her professional expression gradually change to genuine concern that made me realize the gravity of the psychological trauma I had suffered. Beatrice, what you have experienced is a classic example of systematic emotional abuse through manipulation of the truth, she said with a careful but clear voice. Your mother and your adoptive father essentially stole your identity and your basic right to know your biological origins. Hearing a professional validate my outrage gave me a momentary sense of relief, as if finally someone understood the magnitude of what had been done to me. During our weekly sessions that extended over 2 intense months, Dr. Fernanda helped me process not only the discovery of paternity, but also the complex layers of psychological manipulation that had shaped my personality in ways that I was just beginning to understand. Your mother not only hid the truth about your biological father, she explained during our 4th session, she also systematically programmed you to reject him, which is a particularly cruel form of psychological abuse. Through specific therapeutic exercises, I began to identify behavioral patterns that I had developed as a direct result of this emotional programming, my tendency to distrust people who showed genuine interest in me, my difficulty in forming deep emotional bonds, and especially my readiness to accept negative narratives about people without adequately questioning them. Miguel tried to connect with you in many ways throughout the years, observed Dr. Fernanda, after I reported several specific memories of his attempts to get closer. He offered gifts, tried conversations, showed genuine interest in your life. But you had been conditioned to interpret these gestures as inappropriate or suspicious. This insight made my stomach churn with guilt, even though I rationally knew I had been a victim of manipulation. How will I be able to look at him knowing that I rejected my own father for decades because of lies? I asked during a particularly difficult session, and the doctor's response was surprisingly hopeful. Miguel is an adult and certainly understands that you were a victim of the same manipulation he was. What's important now is to decide how you want to build your future based on the truth you know. The moment to confront Roberto came on a Tuesday afternoon, when I finally found enough courage to show up at his office without warning, carrying a copy of the DNA results and decades of accumulated revolt that needed to be expressed directly to the man who had participated in the conspiracy against my identity. Roberto worked as a financial manager at an accounting firm downtown, occupying an elegant office on the 10th floor of a modern commercial building that reflected the professional success he had used to justify his participation in the family Lee. When I entered his room without knocking, I found him concentrating on spreadsheets on his computer, wearing reading glasses that made him look older and more tired than I remembered. His expression instantly changed from casual surprise to genuine panic when he saw me standing in front of his desk with the DNA envelope in my hands. And I realized he had been expecting this confrontation since my mother had certainly informed him about our devastating conversation. "Hi, Dad," I said, placing sarcastic emphasis on the word that now sounded false in my mouth. "Or should I call you Roberto?" Since apparently this is a more complicated matter than I imagined. He slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the desk, his blue eyes observing me with a mixture of guilt and resignation that confirmed his complicity in decades of deception. "Beatriz, your mother told me you discovered about Miguel," he said in a low voice, as if we were discussing an embarrassing secret instead of a lie that had shaped my entire life. The conversation with Roberto revealed aspects of the family conspiracy that were even more calculated and cold than I had imagined, showing that he had actively participated not only in the initial lie, but also in the continuous process of manipulation that kept me away from Miguel. "I always knew there was a possibility that you weren't my biological daughter," he admitted, removing any doubt about his innocence in the situation. "When your mother told me about the affair with Miguel, I demanded a paternity test." This revelation shocked me completely because it implied that he had known the truth since very early on. "So you always knew Miguel was my real father?" I asked, my voice laden with disbelief. Roberto avoided my gaze as he responded, "The first test was inconclusive due to technical problems, but when you were 5 years old, I did another one in secret. And it confirmed that Miguel was your biological father." The coldness with which he spoke about having tested my paternity without my knowledge made me feel like an object of study instead of a child who deserved honesty. "And even knowing the scientific truth, you decided to continue the farce?" I asked. "Decided that I had no right to know my true origin." Roberto finally looked at me directly, and what I saw in his eyes was a disturbing mixture of possessiveness and rational justification. "Beatriz, I raised you since you were a baby, loved you as a daughter, provided education and stability. I was your father in all aspects that truly matter." His response deeply irritated me because it reduced fatherhood to practical issues, completely ignoring my fundamental right to the truth about my origins. The justifications that Roberto presented for his participation in the lie revealed a possessive and controlling mindset that made me question whether I really knew the man who had raised me as his daughter. "Miguel at the time was a walking disaster," he said with evident disdain. "He drank too much, couldn't hold a job, had debts with loan sharks. What kind of environment would that be for a child?" I interrupted his explanation with growing anger. "But that wasn't your decision to make. It was my life, my identity, my right to know my biological father and form my own opinions about him." Roberto rose from his chair and began to pace around the room, his hands gesturing nervously while trying to defend decades of lies. "You don't understand the pressure I was under at the time. Your mother was devastated with guilt. Miguel was trying to interfere in our family, and I had to protect you from all that confusion." His words revealed that he saw Miguel not as my father, but as an intruder who threatened the family he had built based on a lie. "Protect me?" I questioned with bitter irony. "You protected me from knowing my own father, from having authentic family relationships, from understanding who I really am. What kind of protection is that?" The defensiveness in his body posture told me he didn't see his actions as harmful, but rather as necessary to maintain the family stability he valued above my personal autonomy. "Roberto, you stole 35 years of my life," I finally said, my voice coming out calmer but laden with deep sadness. "You and my mother decided you knew what was best for me, without ever giving me the chance to know the truth and make my own decisions." The conversation ended with Roberto trying to minimize the impact of his actions, suggesting that I was exaggerating the importance of biological paternity and should be grateful for the stable family he had provided during my childhood and adolescence. "Beatriz, I love you as a daughter regardless of biology. he said in a final attempt at emotional appeal. Nothing you discover will change the happy years we spent together, the memories we built, the bond we developed. His words, which in other circumstances might have been touching, now sounded manipulative because they completely ignored the violation of trust he had committed. "Roberto, I also care for you for what we were during all these years," I honestly replied. "But that doesn't erase the fact that you actively participated in a lie that shaped my personality and my relationships in a harmful way." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, pausing only to add, "I need time to process all this, and I need to meet my real father." Something that should have happened decades ago. When I left his office, I felt a mixture of relief for having confronted the truth and sadness for the loss of the father figure I thought I knew. Roberto had been a dedicated father in many practical aspects, but his participation in the family conspiracy had permanently poisoned our relationship with distrust and resentment that would be difficult to overcome. On the street, standing in front of the building where he worked, I took out my cell phone and finally dialed Miguel's number, deciding it was time to start building the relationship that had been denied to both of us for more than 3 decades. The call to Miguel was one of the most difficult and emotional conversations of my life, filled with emotion-laden pauses, mutual apologies, and the tentative beginning of a father-daughter connection that should have existed since my birth. When he answered with his familiar voice, but now loaded with completely new meaning, I felt my heart racing in a way I hadn't experienced since adolescence when calling boys I had a crush on. "Miguel." "It's me, Beatrice." "Your niece," I began, still struggling against 3 decades of conditioning that made me use the incorrect term even knowing the truth. "Actually," I immediately corrected, "I'm your daughter. And I really need to talk to you about this." The silence that followed was charged with emotions I could feel through the phone line: surprise, relief, contained joy, and probably tears he was trying to control. "Beatrice, my girl, you discovered the truth?" he finally asked, his voice choked in a way that made me realize he had been waiting for this call for decades. "How did you know? Did your mother tell you, or did you suspect something?" I explained about the DNA test I had done out of genealogical curiosity, about the devastating revelation, and about the difficult conversations with Sandra. Roberto, with a disconcerted and defensive expression, still trying to justify decades of lies with arguments about protection and family stability that now sounded completely empty in the face of indisputable scientific truth. During the 3 days following that devastating phone call with Miguel, I lived in a state of emotional limbo that oscillated between moments of euphoria for finally knowing the truth and deep periods of mourning for the childhood that was stolen from me through the systematic manipulation of my mother and Roberto. Miguel called me daily during this period, always respecting my emotional space, but making it clear that he was available for any conversation I wanted to have about our complex family situation. His calls were gentle, full of careful questions about how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if I would like to meet in person for a longer conversation. "Beatrice, my dear daughter, I don't want to pressure you in any way," he said in one of those calls that would become precious to me. "I know you need time to process all of this, but I want you to know that I'm here for you after all these years waiting for an opportunity to have you as my real daughter." His voice, loaded with genuine emotion, completely contrasted with the calculated coldness that I had learned to associate with him during decades of family conditioning. "Miguel." "Father," I corrected myself for the first time, feeling how this simple word completely changed the meaning of our relationship. "I also want to know you for real, know who you are beyond the lies they told me about you throughout my life." The first in-person meeting between us after the revelation of paternity was set for a Saturday afternoon at the municipal park where I used to play as a child, a neutral location that would allow us to talk with privacy but without the emotional pressure of being at one of our homes. I arrived at the park 15 minutes before the agreed time, feeling a mixture of nervousness and expectation that reminded me of the first romantic encounters of adolescence, but with a much greater emotional intensity because I was about to really meet my biological father for the first time. When I saw Miguel walking toward the bench where I was sitting, carrying a small bouquet of white daisies, my favorite flowers that he had discovered through our telephone conversation, I felt my heart race in a way that I had never experienced in relation to any member of my family. He was dressed in a light blue dress shirt and dark jeans, his graying hair carefully combed, and there was an expression of nervousness mixed with contained joy in his green eyes that were identical to mine. "Beatrice, my girl. Look how you've grown and become a beautiful and intelligent woman," he said as he approached, his voice choked with genuine emotion. "I've dreamed of this moment for decades, imagining what it would be like to talk with you as a real father and daughter." During the 4 hours we spent together in that first meeting, I discovered aspects of Miguel's personality that had been completely distorted or omitted in the family narratives that shaped my perception of him throughout my life. He told me about his career as a history teacher in a public school, a profession he had practiced for more than 20 years with genuine dedication to students, especially those from underprivileged families who needed guidance and support. "I've always had a special connection with young people facing family difficulties," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "perhaps because I myself faced the difficulty of not being able to be present in my own daughter's life." I discovered that he had graduated in history from the State University, that he read voraciously on various subjects, from ancient philosophy to contemporary literature, and that he played guitar as a hobby, composing songs that he never showed to anyone out of modesty. "You know, Beatrice, during all these years watching you grow up from afar, I saw traits of my personality in you. Your intellectual curiosity, your sensitivity to art, even the way you tilt your head when you're thinking deeply about something," he said with a melancholic smile. It was torturous to recognize my own daughter and not be able to approach her because of the agreements that had been made. Miguel also revealed details about his own childhood and youth that explained many of the problems that Sandra had used to justify her decision to keep me away from him. "It's true that I drank too much during some years of my youth," he admitted with painful honesty, "but that happened precisely because of the frustration of not being able to be a father to my own daughter, of having to pretend I was just a distant uncle when I desperately wanted to be present in your education and growth." He told me about how he had fought against depression for years, how he had sought psychological help to deal with the impossible situation he found himself in, and how he had gradually rebuilt his life focusing on education and helping other young people as a way to channel his repressed paternal energy. "I never remarried after the affair with your mother," he revealed in a low voice, "because I knew it would be unfair to any woman to try to build a family when my heart was divided with the daughter I couldn't have." This confession moved me deeply because it showed that I had been a constant presence in his life even when he was just a peripheral presence in mine. "Dad, I'm so sorry for all the years we lost together," I said, consciously using the word dad and seeing how his eyes filled with tears of joy upon hearing it. "I'm sorry for believing the lies, for being cold to you for so many years when you were just trying to be the best father possible within the impossible circumstances imposed on you." Our meetings became regular after that first afternoon in the park, gradually evolving from careful and formal conversations to natural and spontaneous interactions between a father and daughter who had finally found a way to each other. Miguel took me to places that were important to him: the school where he worked as a teacher, the public library where he spent many afternoons reading and preparing lessons, the music store where he had bought his first guitar. In each place, I discovered new aspects of his personality that had been hidden or distorted by false family narratives. His colleagues spoke about him with genuine admiration, describing him as a dedicated teacher who frequently used his own money to buy school supplies for needy students, who stayed at school after hours to give free tutoring, and who had helped dozens of young people get scholarships to universities. "Professor Miguel is one of the most generous people we know," said the school principal during one of my visits. "He has a natural paternal heart, always caring for students as if they were his own children." This description completely contrasted with the image of an irresponsible and selfish man that Sandra had built in my mind for decades. How could my mother have distorted the truth so much about who you really are? I asked myself internally, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness for the injustice that had been committed against both of us. During this period of reconnection with Miguel, I also had to deal with the emotional consequences of confronting Sandra about decades of systematic lies that had shaped my personality and family relationships in a deeply harmful way. I scheduled a formal meeting with her at a neutral restaurant because I knew I needed to have this final conversation to properly close the cycle of devastating discoveries that had completely changed my perception of our family. Sandra arrived at the restaurant visibly nervous, wearing an elegant black dress that made her look like she was going to a funeral, a comparison that seemed appropriate to me considering we were there to definitively bury the mother-daughter relationship based on lies. "Beatrice, daughter, I hope we can talk like adults about this whole situation," she said as she sat down, avoiding my direct gaze and nervously playing with the rings on her fingers. "I know you're upset with me, but you need to understand that all my decisions were made thinking about your well-being and what would be best for you." Her attempt to justify decades of psychological manipulation as maternal concern deeply irritated me because it reduced my pain and confusion to a simple family misunderstanding that could be resolved with a clarifying conversation. "Mom, you not only lied to me about who my biological father is," I replied with a firm and controlled voice. "You systematically programmed me to hate my own father, taught me to despise him, destroyed any possibility of me having a healthy relationship with him for 35 years of my life." The conversation at the restaurant lasted 4 to 10 hours, during which Sandra alternated between attempts to justify her actions as maternal protection and moments of partial admission of guilt that never fully acknowledged the magnitude of the psychological damage she had caused. "Beatrice, you need to understand that at the time Miguel really had problems," she insisted, still trying to maintain fragments of the false narrative she had constructed. "He drank, had debts, didn't show responsibility. I genuinely believed that it would be harmful for you to have contact with him." I interrupted her explanation with a firmness that surprised me. "Mom, even if all that was true at the time, and now I know much of it was exaggerated or invented, it still wasn't your unilateral decision to deprive me of the right to know my biological father. You stole 35 years of relationship with him from me, made me miss his personal recovery, his transformation into a responsible and dedicated person." I observed how she processed my words, her expression oscillating between defensiveness and what seemed to be the beginning of a genuine recognition of the gravity of her actions. "And worst of all," I continued, feeling tears forming in my eyes, "is that you taught me to be a prejudiced and judgmental person who rejected someone based on distorted stories instead of giving that person a chance to show who they really were." Sandra finally stopped trying to justify herself and remained silent for several long minutes, looking at her hands intertwined on the table as if she was seeing for the first time the magnitude of what she had done. "Beatrice, I don't know how to ask forgiveness for something so serious," she finally said, her voice coming out in a whisper laden with guilt. "Perhaps there is no possible forgiveness for what I did to you and Miguel all these years." The process of rebuilding the relationship with Miguel deepened during the following weeks, evolving from formal meetings to genuinely familial moments that allowed me to experience for the first time in my adult life what it meant to have a truly present and interested father. He taught me to play guitar on Sunday afternoons, his experienced hands gently guiding my inexperienced hands over the strings while explaining basic chords with an infinite patience that I had never experienced with Roberto. "Music is a universal language, Beatrice," he would say as he showed me how to position my fingers correctly. "It's a way of expressing feelings that sometimes words cannot adequately communicate." During these music lessons, I discovered that we had inherited not only the same eye color, but also the same artistic sensibility and the same capacity to be deeply moved by simple but meaningful melodies. Miguel composed a special song for me, a soft and melancholic melody that he called Found Daughter, and when he played it for the first time, we both cried without embarrassment, embraced on the sofa in his modest but cozy living room. This song represents all the years we lost together, but also the joy of finally being able to be father and daughter for real," he explained with a choked voice. "Each note carries my love for you, the love I kept in silence for decades waiting for an opportunity like this." It was during one of these musical afternoons that Miguel revealed something to me that completely changed my perspective on some of the most significant moments of my childhood and adolescence. "Beatrice, I need to tell you about some things I did for you over the years, even though I couldn't approach you directly," he said, putting the guitar aside and looking at me intensely. "Remember when you were in high school and you won that unexpected scholarship for the architecture course at the private university?" I immediately remembered the moment. I had placed third in a technical drawing contest and had been surprised with a full scholarship that completely changed my educational future. Of course, I remember. It was what allowed me to study architecture instead of giving up university due to financial problems, I replied, beginning to suspect where the conversation was going. "That scholarship wasn't just the result of your placement in the contest," Miguel revealed with a shy smile. "I had created a secret education fund in your name, contributing monthly for years. And when I learned about the contest through an acquaintance who worked at the university, I used that money to finance an additional scholarship that was offered as a special prize." This revelation left me completely shocked, because it meant that Miguel had been secretly financing my education for years, acting as a present father even when he was forced to remain physically distant. "Dad, how long did you do this?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Throughout your adolescence and youth, whenever I could save some extra money from my teacher's salary, I would deposit it in a special account thinking about your future," he answered. "It was my way of participating in your upbringing even from a distance, of contributing to you becoming the intelligent and successful woman you are today." As our relationship deepened, I began to realize how discovering the truth about my paternity had altered not only my present, but also my understanding of past events that now took on completely different meanings. I remembered several situations during my childhood where Miguel had tried to approach me in subtle ways that I interpreted at the time as gestures of an eccentric uncle, but which I now recognized as desperate attempts of a father to connect with his daughter. During family gatherings, he always sat in a spot from where he could discreetly observe me, and now I realized it wasn't coincidental. He was memorizing each of my expressions, each gesture, trying to know his daughter through careful observation since he couldn't approach me directly. When I was a teenager and showed interest in history books, new and interesting copies would always appear in the school library without anyone knowing who had donated them, and now I discovered it was Miguel discreetly nurturing my intellectual interests. How many signs did I miss over the years? I constantly questioned myself, reviewing old memories through this new perspective. How many demonstrations of paternal love did I misinterpret because of the lies I was taught about him? Each new memory that gained renewed significance made me feel simultaneously happy to discover evidence of my father's constant love and sad about the years lost due to systematic family manipulation. The final confrontation with Roberto happened in a meeting that I specifically arranged to establish new relationship boundaries based on the truth I now knew about our complex family dynamics. We met in the same office where he had worked for decades, but this time it was he who seemed nervous and out of place, as if being judged by a personal tribunal. "Roberto," I began, using his first name instead of father to make clear the change in our relationship. "I need you to understand that I have completely peeled away the family lies that shaped my personality for decades, and that I now know the truth about who my biological father really is." He tried to maintain his usual defensive posture, nervously adjusting his glasses and unnecessarily organizing papers on the desk. But I noticed that the arrogant confidence he had shown in our previous meeting had been replaced by genuine apprehension. "Beatrice, I hope you don't let these discoveries completely destroy our relationship. Regardless of biology, I raised you as a daughter throughout your childhood," he said, still trying to position himself as a victim of circumstances instead of acknowledging his active participation in the family conspiracy. "Roberto, you raised me based on an elaborate lie that harmed both me and my biological father," I responded firmly. I won't pretend this can be easily forgotten or forgiven just because you provided material stability during my childhood. During this final conversation with Roberto, I clearly established that our future relationship would be based on absolute honesty and mutual respect for the choices we had both made as adults aware of the consequences of our actions. I won't completely cut off our relationship because I recognize that you were an important father figure during my formative years, I calmly explained. But I also won't pretend that nothing has changed now that I know the truth about the lies that were constructed around me. Roberto seemed genuinely surprised by my emotional maturity in handling the situation, perhaps expecting me to react with more anger or drama. What I expect from you now, I continued, is to treat Miguel with the respect he deserves as my biological father, to stop spreading negative narratives about him, and to accept that I will build a close relationship with him regardless of your approval. I saw something changing in his expression during this conversation, as if for the first time he was really understanding the long-term implications of his past choices. Beatriz, I never stopped to think about how this situation would affect you when you discovered the truth, he finally admitted. Perhaps I was selfish, protecting the family I wanted to have instead of considering your right to know your true origin. It was the first time he showed any genuine recognition of his responsibility in the situation, instead of just justifying himself as a victim of circumstances. Roberto, I appreciate your honesty, I responded, and I hope we can build an adult relationship based on truth, even if it's different from what we had before. The following months were a period of intense emotional and family reorganization, where I needed to carefully navigate between my new relationship with Miguel, my transformed relationship with Sandra and Roberto, and especially my own internal process of identity redefinition based on truth instead of elaborate lies. Miguel and I established our own family traditions, Sunday lunches at his house where he taught me recipes he had learned from his mother, my paternal grandmother, whom I never properly knew. Monthly visits to museums and cultural exhibitions where we could discuss art and history, and especially long daily phone calls where we shared everyday experiences like any normal father and daughter. Beatriz, do you know what moves me most about our new relationship? He asked me one afternoon while we prepared his famous eggplant lasagna together. It's discovering that despite all the years apart, we developed similar values, similar tastes, even mannerisms that are clearly genetic. It was true. The more time we spent together, the more similarities we discovered between our personalities, from our tendency to organize books by color on the shelf to our preference for classic films and our exaggerated sensitivity to social injustices. It's as if we're making up for lost time at an accelerated pace. I used to comment to my friends, discovering in a few months connections that we should have developed over decades. During this period of family reconstruction, I also had to deal with the curiosity and sometimes judgment of people close to us who had known our family for years and now discovered the secrets that had been so carefully kept. Some friends reacted with genuine shock and immediate support. Others asked invasive questions about intimate details of the situation, and a few showed subtle judgments about the choices I was making by getting closer to Miguel after decades of distance. Beatriz, are you sure this is wise? Asked a longtime friend during coffee. I mean, even if he is your biological father, you don't really know him. Maybe your mother had valid reasons to keep you apart. This type of comment irritated me deeply because it perpetuated exactly the kind of prejudice and superficial judgment that had been used to separate me from Miguel throughout my life. Elena, you're talking about a man you've never personally met, basing your opinion on stories told by people who had a personal interest in distorting the truth about him, I firmly replied. I've spent months talking with Miguel, meeting his friends, colleagues, students. All evidence shows that he is an honest and caring person who was systematically slandered. These conversations taught me a lot about how prejudices can be perpetuated across generations and how important it is to question narratives presented to us as absolute truths, especially when they involve complex family relationships. 6 months after discovering the truth about my paternity, I organized a special dinner at my house to officially introduce Miguel as my father to the closest circle of friends and family who still didn't know our complete story. It was an emotional and cathartic evening where I could finally publicly present the man who had become the most important father figure in my adult life. Miguel arrived carrying a box with special wine he had kept for years, waiting for a significant occasion to open it. "It's a wine from the year you were born," he explained with an emotional smile. "I bought it hoping to celebrate some special moment in your life, even not knowing when or how that would happen." During dinner, I observed with satisfaction how my closest friends naturally interacted with Miguel, discovering for themselves the warm and interesting person he was, without needing elaborate explanations about our complex family history. Marcos, my older brother, arrived in the middle of dinner after much hesitation about whether to attend or not, and it was particularly touching to observe how he and Miguel found points of connection through conversations about literature and education. "Beatriz, now I understand why you decided to build a relationship with him," Marcos whispered to me during dessert. "He really seems to be a genuine and interesting person. I regret that all of us have lost the opportunity to properly know him during these years." This validation from my brother meant a lot to me, because Marcos had always been skeptical about my emotional decisions, and his approval of Miguel based on direct observation confirmed that I had made the right choice in approaching my biological father. The relationship with Sandra remained tense but cordial during this period, characterized by careful conversations where we both tried to navigate our new dynamic without provoking destructive emotional explosions. She made some genuine efforts to get closer to Miguel and show remorse for decades of antagonism, including an awkward but meaningful lunch where she apologized directly to him for the first time. "Miguel, I need to ask forgiveness for what I did to you and Beatriz all these years," she said with a choked voice during this meeting mediated by me. "I convinced myself that I was protecting my daughter, but now I realize I was mostly protecting my own fears and insecurities." Miguel received her apology with grace and maturity that made me proud, responding that he understood the pressures she had faced as a young mother and that he held no grudge for the past, only hoped they could build a respectful relationship in the future for everyone's well-being. "Sandra, what's important now is that Beatriz has the opportunity to know both parents without feeling obligated to choose sides in a war that shouldn't exist," he said wisely. "Our past mistakes shouldn't continue to harm our daughter in the present." Observing this conversation gave me hope that perhaps in the future we could function as a non-traditional but harmonious family, where different important people in my life could coexist peacefully. Almost a year after the discovery that completely changed my life, I reflect on how this experience transformed not only my family relationships, but also my understanding of truth, forgiveness, and the complexity of human relationships. Miguel became much more than just my biological father. He became my mentor, my close friend, and living proof that it's never too late to build authentic connections based on genuine love and mutual honesty. Our relationship continues to evolve naturally, like any normal father-daughter relationship, with small discussions about politics during Sunday lunches, advice sought on important professional decisions, and mainly a constant sense of unconditional support that I had never experienced before. "You know, Beatriz," he said one recent afternoon as we worked together in the small garden he had created in his backyard, "what impresses me most is how you manage to maintain your generous and optimistic essence despite having grown up based on lies about your own identity." His words made me reflect on how this experience, though painful, had made me a stronger, more compassionate, and more determined person to live authentically. The impact of this discovery also extended beyond family relationships, profoundly influencing my professional career as an architect and my philosophy of life in general. I began to question other truths I had accepted without question over the years. From small personal preferences I discovered I had adopted through family influence to important professional decisions I might have made differently if I had known my true origin. Miguel encouraged me to explore my artistic creativity in ways I had never considered before. suggesting that I experiment with incorporating musical and historical elements into my architectural projects, an interdisciplinary approach that quickly became my professional trademark and brought me recognition in the field. "You inherited my passion for history and my artistic sensitivity," he proudly observed when I presented my first project that combined sustainable architecture with local historical references. "It's fascinating to see how characteristics that were latent in you for decades can now be freely expressed." Attorney Luna, who had helped me navigate the more complex legal aspects of the family situation, became not just a trusted professional, but also a friend who helped me understand how issues of identity and family rights are more complicated and nuanced than most people imagine. "Beatrice, your case is not isolated," she explained during one of our final conversations about the legal process. "Unfortunately, many families build narratives based on half-truths or complete lies that are perpetuated for decades, causing significant psychological damage to everyone involved." She encouraged me to consider sharing my experience publicly, perhaps through lectures or articles, to help other people who might be experiencing similar situations of family manipulation or late discoveries about their true identity. "Your story has the potential to inspire other people to question toxic family narratives and seek the truth, even when it's painful," she wisely suggested. The idea of transforming my personal experience into something that could benefit others intrigued me and began to germinate as a future possibility. During this period of reconstruction and personal growth, I also developed a new perspective on forgiveness that transcended the simple decision to forgive or not forgive Sandra and Roberto for their past actions. I realized that genuine forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or accepting harmful behaviors, but rather releasing the anger and resentment that were preventing me from living fully in the present. "Mom, I forgive you not because what you did was acceptable," I explained to Sandra during one of our monthly conversations that became part of our new family dynamic, "but because carrying anger and resentment is hurting me more than it's punishing you for your past mistakes." Sandra received this communication with tears of relief and gratitude, recognizing that she didn't deserve this generosity, but being deeply grateful to receive it. Our relationship would never return to what it was before the discovery. Absolute trust had been permanently broken, but it evolved into something more mature and honest, based on mutual recognition of our human flaws and the willingness to build something new on the rubble of what had been destroyed. The final decision about how to publicly conclude this transformative journey came during a conversation with Miguel about family legacies and the importance of breaking negative cycles that are transmitted through generations. "Dad, what bothers me most about this whole situation isn't just what happened to me," I reflected during one of our regular walks in the park where we had our first meeting as father and daughter, "but thinking about how many other families might be living similar situations without having the courage or necessary circumstances to seek the truth." Miguel agreed that our experience could serve as an inspiring example for other people who were facing complex family dilemmas, demonstrating that it's possible to confront established lies and rebuild relationships based on honesty, even when it's initially painful and disruptive. "Beatrice, perhaps our story can help other people understand that true family is built through genuine love and mutual honesty, not through biological obligations or convenient narratives," he suggested with the wisdom I had learned to deeply value. "If you feel comfortable sharing our journey, I will completely support that decision." 2 years after the discovery that revolutionized my understanding of my own identity, I regularly organize lectures at universities and community centers about family truth and personal identity, sharing my experience as a way to help other people who might be facing similar situations of late discoveries about their origins or systematic family manipulation. Miguel frequently accompanies me in these presentations, offering the perspective of the father who was unjustly separated from his daughter. And together we create a powerful dialogue about forgiveness, family reconstruction, and the importance of questioning established narratives when they don't align with our internal intuition. The most important thing we've learned, I often say to audiences during these lectures, is that it's never too late to seek the truth about who we are, even when that truth challenges family structures that seem solid for decades. The responses we receive are invariably emotional, with many people approaching after the presentations to share their own stories of family secrets, hidden identities, or relationships that were distorted by years of well-intentioned lies. The dinner table at my house now regularly hosts Miguel, Sandra, Roberto, Marcos, and occasionally even friends and colleagues who have become part of my chosen family, a configuration that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, but which now represents the rich and authentic complexity of human relationships when they are based on honesty instead of convenience. During these dinners, I observe with fascination how people who were antagonists for decades can peacefully coexist when each takes responsibility for their past actions and commits to building something better for the future. Miguel and Roberto have developed a respectful friendship based on their mutual love for me and their recognition that both contributed to my formation in different but valuable ways. Sandra still shows occasional discomfort with Miguel's presence, but makes genuine efforts to include him in family conversations and even asks for his opinion on matters where his expertise as a teacher might be useful. It's strange and beautiful at the same time. I commented to a friend recently to see how a family can be rebuilt on completely different foundations when everyone is committed to honesty and personal growth. The garden that Miguel taught me to cultivate has become a living metaphor for our family journey. Plants that seemed dead when we began properly caring for them bloomed in surprising ways. Some species we thought incompatible grew harmoniously side by side, and the entire space transformed from a neglected piece of land into an oasis of beauty and tranquility. "You know, daughter," Miguel said on a recent afternoon as we pruned together the rose bushes we planted on the first anniversary of our reconnection, "I think we've learned that family relationships are like gardens. They need constant attention, honesty about what's working and what isn't, and especially patience to allow beautiful things to grow at the right time." His words perfectly captured not just our personal journey, but also the universal lesson that our experience offers to anyone facing complex family challenges or questioning established truths about their own identity. Today, when I look at the framed photograph on my desk, a recent image of Miguel and me playing guitar together in the garden, both genuinely smiling at the camera, I feel a profound gratitude for the courage I found to take that seemingly simple DNA test that revealed a truth that completely transformed my life. The pain of discovering decades of family lies was intense and lasting, but the gift of finally knowing my true father and building an authentic relationship with him far outweighed any suffering caused by the initial discovery. Miguel always says that life's best gifts often come wrapped in difficult experiences, and our story proves that it's possible to transform family betrayal into personal growth, systematic lies into liberating truths, and years of forced separation into a father-daughter connection stronger than many people who grew up together throughout their lives. "Mom, why did you teach me to hate the only man who truly loved me?" was the question that started it all. But the answer I found was much more complex and, finally, much more hopeful than I could ever have imagined when I tore open that fateful envelope on a Thursday morning that forever changed the course of my existence. Did you like Beatrice's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.